Good morning. Welcome to Nadine at 9, coming to you live from the great Damn Radio, Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Arts Studio in the beautiful Lake of the Ozarks. I have a special guest with us today, and I'm going to wait and let her introduce herself. I'm going to give you a little teaser for it. I hope everyone's week is going well. Here in Missouri, we've had quite a bit of rain, so that's nice. It's nice when you know that the ground is getting nourished, and now it's nice and hot and sunny, so all of our grass is going to need to be cut, but that's okay because we're soaking up the last few days of summer before school starts and all of that. I actually I think I've mentioned this before, but I am a homeschooler. I actually was homeschooled, and now I homeschool my son. And so we kind of get to choose when we start school, which is going to be Labor Day. So we have a little bit longer than those around here. I'm just going to go ahead, and if my special guest is ready, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi. Good morning. I'm Gail Griswold.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks for the make it feel so special.
You are special, Gail.
So I guess some people in the area know me either from the businesses I own, Shawnee Bluff Winery. We just opened up our third location, Riverbird Winery. So check that out if you can. A shout out to my crew that's been working hard to open up those places here in the Ozarks. But
and it is beautiful out there.
Yeah, it's a little trek. It's a 5-mile gravel road, but once you get there, you really feel like you are in the Ozarks for sure. And then a lot of people also know me for being on the school board. I did one term, 3 years, and it was a lot in 3 years. So during that time, I learned a lot about education, especially policy and law, and watching the state capitol maneuver different legislation. It's been a lot to watch and try to educate and inform and sound the alarm on a lot of things. So
yeah. You've done a good job of that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Because there is a lot to keep track of. I've talked about that a few times on the show already, that, the normal everyday person who's running around with work and kids and any kind of extracurriculars that any of us might have, it's so hard to keep up with everything that's going on, especially when here in Missouri, our legislative session is for such a short amount of time, and so much gets crammed into those few months, and it's just like full speed ahead as soon as January hits. So I appreciate people like you that are very knowledgeable about reading bills and helping explain them, and then educating all of us on it, because that's super important.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not alone in it. Even your Stacy Shorter has a show. Ike Skeleton's, he's pretty informed. There's a lot going on for him to do as commissioner, but it's nice to have more and more people, even like yourself, engaging and watching, and because everybody sees things from a different perspective and picks up on things, or has, how it affects them personally in their lives as far as freedom and liberty and true educational freedom. So all those things. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but there's definitely a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there is. I know. That's always the conundrum on this show, is that it's like I want to keep it concise so people don't get really overwhelmed, but at the same time, it's like, where do you stop? Because it just keeps unraveling more and more and more. So
right.
Yeah, it's a hard balance for sure.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, I think it's important to start with education, to know a little bit of history, even if it's just kind of, vague, not super detailed. And one thing that I didn't really understand or know about was compulsory education. So just kind of going back to where that started and where that idea came from, because we could go back, in different movements across the United States, Europe, as far as education goes. And that's a whole nother topic when you want to get into those different groups and the way they infiltrated education and the institutions and everything. But in Missouri, there used to be, no child labor laws. And so there became kind of this moral, when you start to legislate morality, that's where it comes a little tricky. So Joseph Falk was a Democrat governor in Missouri, and he was really probably, pro-labor, rights, and really pushed for the child labor laws. And so what happened with that then is children they were young, and they were working in factories or whatever. Mainly affected in the urban areas is where they saw it the most. And so they, the kids now were on the streets, and they weren't working. And they said, okay, well, these kids are hanging out in pool halls, and they're a bunch of, savages. And so we need to go and send them, to school.
Right. So hang on a second. So when you said the labor laws, you're referring to they put labor laws in place.
Correct.
So kids couldn't work under a certain age,
Correct.
basically. So
Yes.
what do you know what that age was?
I think it was at least 12 at that time.
Okay.
Let me look. So Joseph Falk was a governor from 1905 to 1901. I'd have to look exactly. I apologize. I don't have that right on me.
That's okay.
Something to look up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Because now the labor laws are, what is it? I mean, I think there's different regulations for different ages, but, it's like 14 years old, you can work a certain amount of hours in a certain amount of time frame, and
Right.
then it just goes from there. So, okay, you can keep moving.
Okay. No, it's okay. At some point, the labor laws were enacted, and there were less children going to work, and now they're just running amok, apparently, is the narrative, at least.
Gotcha.
And so they, I'll do a little bit of education theory. Rousseau wrote a book called On Education.
Okay.
And it talks about how if the children are left to the parents, they'll become savages. That's why I say savages a lot, is because if they're left to their parents and the parents just let them do whatever they want, run around on the farm and no guidance, then they'll become savages. And so the savages need to be sent to the master, is what he says. And the master is the teacher. And we're not talking about just your teacher, like, a tutor. I mean, they're talking about a school, like
Right.
sending them to the city to go to the schools. So it kind of reminds me of Huckleberry Finn. And I really think, without confirming with Mark Twain, that's kind of the idea, is that Huckleberry, they kept trying to civilize him. There's like the stepmom or whatever kept trying to wash him up, and he just could not be civilized. But Huckleberry was awesome. He had he had a lot of freedom and liberty, and so there's a balance between freedom and then being forced to do something you don't want if you're not being a criminal. So it kind of goes back then to this compulsory education law, where now they're forcing parents to send their children to school. And I think this was even before any type of homeschool laws were really, I think the homeschool laws later, people had to fight for homeschool rights, I think. And you might know this better, in the 80s, I think. And that's kind of where those larger groups really started for homeschooling protection. So we're back into the early 1900s, where compulsory education, so you had to send your children to a school.
Right.
And those laws are, over a century old, and they're definitely outdated, because parents, we have a little bit different of society, and whether or not that was right at that time,
Right.
probably not either, right? So that kind of goes back to educational freedom. We can get more to that, more in the current time, but that's kind of what happened. So people are forced to send their kids to school. So we have compulsory laws still on the books today that are probably a little bit overreach from the government. So
because that, like you were saying, I mean, the thought behind that was that the parents have no idea how to actually raise their kids
Right.
in a way that's going to benefit society, and so we need someone who's an expert.
the experts were better. Those are the people that are coming through the universities and the institutions, and they are separately getting extremely indoctrinated by different groups that had come over from Europe.
Yep.
They started to introduce psychology into education. There's different university. One that I encourage people to look up is Leipzig University.
Okay.
Leipzig, I think is how you spell it.
Okay.
And that's where they coined the term psychology. They just made it up. And then they started to train up psychologists there and sent them over to the United States. They started to go into the bigger institutions, and then there's also some communists in there, like Paulo Freire, like some different movements from other parts of the world, kind of go to the UN and then get over to Harvard and all that. That's in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But going back a little bit more, and for Missouri specifically, what you had was now a lot of the rural areas had the one-room schoolhouse. Mm-hmm. And, we talk a lot about, can we go back to the one-room schoolhouse? And I would say that there's a lot of places that are probably doing that with their smaller co-ops or little academies. That would be the closest thing we have. They're not publicly funded, but probably don't want that either. But so what happened is I have this bulletin from Missouri University, and the experts there were talking about how it kind of goes back to Rousseau and the Savages. They're literally talking about how the farmers, it literally says it, how the farmers have no idea how to raise their own children. Mm-hmm. The one-room schoolhouse isn't enough, and we need these kids to get off the farm and go to school.
Goodness. And
yeah, it really belittles the farming community big time. And I have that book at home, and I'd like to get that information out more. I'm trying to work on a little mini book, but that takes a while. I'm not a writer. I'm a researcher.
Right.
So anyway, that was the narrative. So you also, back then, you have these people working in rural areas and farming communities that don't know that these bulletins are being put out. They don't know that they're making plans for them. I mean, we have access to information now, way more readily available, so that we can, see, read, and whatever. But back then, they did not know that they were conspiring to consolidate them.
Yeah, they were busy working on the farm to feed everybody.
Yeah. Meanwhile, their taxes are going to a public university that is making plans for them and their children. And that continues to this day, of course. So what happens then is Missouri starts to consolidate schools. And I'm trying to think of what year that was. That was, again, probably early 1900s. So you'll see a lot of these little one-room schoolhouses everywhere you drive, and they're cute and kind of kept together. But they didn't close on their own. They were forced to consolidate.
Okay.
And that's how we got the bigger public school districts. And that really changed, where it just became more and more centralized education, more and more and more. And then easier to, put a bunch of schools in one place and control the education of them.
Right.
Yeah. And, further away from their parents, longer away from their parents. I think even the one-room schoolhouse days, you only had to go till 8th grade, and now you have to go to 12th grade. Mm-hmm. So it's just all this incrementalism of taking the children, from their parents, because their parents don't know any better. And sure, are there going to be parents that you don't agree with how they're raising their children, or they are running the streets, and left to, maybe I think of like New York and Boston with the mob, right? Like the little kids, they were running the streets. They had them do some of their dirty work, but you can't regulate that necessarily. There could have been maybe a different approach to, saying your kids can't run around on the streets.
Yeah,
versus
absolutely.
Forcing them to go into a school. So that is kind of so that's kind of gets us up to the 40s and 50s. And, well, I'm even going to go further. I'm going to bring you up to 1993, because that is when Missouri had a very large law, an act, put into place. It's called the Outstanding Schools Act of 1993. And that was during Democrat Mel Carnahan's time in office as governor. And what happened was there was a lawsuit. There's always a lawsuit that's triggering something, and sometimes you wonder if that's purposeful, right?
Yeah.
We see that a lot. So there was a lawsuit that said that the way that the foundation formula, which is the public money, which is the state, money, there's the Missouri State Constitution mandates 25% of all general revenue from the state, not federal, go directly to public education. That's in the Constitution. So how they were dispersing it, one to one. Each kid got the same each school got the same amount per kid no matter where they were.
Okay.
And what the lawsuit used Kirkwood as an example and said Kirkwood has a bigger tax base locally and is spending $11,000 per student, but then the district next to it doesn't have that much money, and they're only spending $6,000 per student. And so that is not equitable, is what they said. So the lawsuit the judge said to the state of Missouri, you have to spend this money in an equitable manner across all districts. And he said, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but you need to do it. And that gave us, there was already a foundation formula per se, but that changed the way the formula was then going to be done. So with that, they said, we need to have a new law, per the judge. But what they did is they packaged a bunch of other stuff with it.
Of course.
So what we got out of that was where the state took over accreditation at that time and what we're dealing with still today. So for 30 years, Missouri State is doing accreditation of the individual schools.
Can you... I am a homeschooler, so when you say accreditation of the schools, I honestly don't really know what you're talking about.
Sure, and there's different types of accreditation. A lot of the private schools use third-party accreditation, and they don't have to get that. That's more of a gold ribbon to say, hey, look, we've been accredited by this or this. So it's not mandatory. It's just kind of a selling factor.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm tracking now.
That's for private. And then or we might have a homeschool curriculum that's accredited. Then for public, what the state is doing is unlike most states. I think there's, 15 states that don't require accreditation at all, even from a third party. And then there's some states that require at least a third party accreditation. And that is where the school would on its own go and find an accreditation company that they like, that's private, and then work with them and get accredited.
Okay.
And those accreditation companies are approved. They're not the best either because they're approved by the federal government. So,
well, they're doing a really good job at things. So I feel like that's fine.
The thing that I said, I would rather go with being able to pick a private accreditation company for my school versus being forced to do it through one entity, which is the state. Because at least you could work with them. I think they work with you more locally, so you can localize your plan. It's not as centralized. It's not as, the same as everybody else in Missouri. Because, maybe we have, such to say Camdenton, where I was on the board, say we have more of a need for grammar and English. Then we can kind of shift and really put a lot of focus there to bring that up instead of having to do all these other things that the state is requiring. So what happened with the 1993 Outstanding Schools Act is it tied the money to accreditation. This specific time period in Missouri politics, super interesting because the Republicans were a minority and once this passed, used this to they campaigned on how bad it was. They Todd Aiken and T. Mark Elliott and one other guy filed a lawsuit when it passed. Those guys were House representatives at the time, I think, if not senators, but they were state, Missouri representatives. But they filed a lawsuit that said it was unconstitutional because in this big packaged act in 1993, there was so much going on. They were forcing a local tax levy.
Right.
So the argument is that it went around Hancock Amendment. And I think that it did. I think that whoever ruled that it wasn't unconstitutional probably got it wrong. And everyone's like, oh, judges, don't get it wrong. Well, they get it wrong sometimes.
Sometimes
they do, and sometimes they don't.
Because they're humans.
Yeah. Or maybe it wasn't presented in the correct way, or maybe there are some loopholes in Hancock Amendment. It is, and that's another reason why they tried Hancock 2. They tried to pass a second version because Hancock 1 just wasn't tight enough.
Okay, you're going to have to explain the Hancock Amendment.
Okay, so the Hancock Amendment was passed, I might have to look that one up, by a guy named, what is his? I think it might have been John Hancock. Let's look him up. So you're going to hear the Hancock Amendment a lot in policy in general because it's a taxing law. So, 1980. Okay. So on November 4th, 1980, Missouri voters approved an amendment, so it's in the Constitution, to the state's Constitution, commonly referred to as the Hancock Amendment, that placed a limit on the government's ability to tax and spend its residents' money.
Okay.
So without a vote of the people.
Right. Okay.
And so what this act did then, 13 years later, it was forcing the local resident. This is how they got around it. This is kind of like the gas tax. The gas tax technically is our, some people argue that it doesn't adhere to the Hancock Amendment because the legislative passed the tax, the people did not. And so in the 1993 Outstanding Schools Act, it had a forced mandate in there and said that the local residents have to pass a minimum tax levy. I have it right here. I think it's 2 points. I'll pick it up here in a second. But that the residents have to take it to the vote of the people, and they have to have a minimum tax levy for their school district. And if you don't pass that, here, I'll read this. This is
okay.
So this is from the current local newspaper in Van Buren, Missouri, Thursday, December 23rd, 1993. Here's a little excerpt. Beginning in September of 1997, a school district that does not have an equalized operating tax levy of $2.75 is to be, quote, unclassified, unquote, by the State Board of Education. Section 9, Sections 88.790 to 165.051. That's in the Missouri Reviser if you Google that. This law also provides that any school district classified as unaccredited by the State Board of Education for 2 successive years shall lapse. The students and the territory of the lapsed school district are to be assigned to another school district or districts by the State Board of Ed. Meaning, if you didn't adopt this tax, so if you took it to the vote of people and they said no, you would be unclassified and the state could take you over.
Right.
And so you would probably still be forced to pay that tax somehow, I'm sure. And you would be sending your kids they would have been consolidated into another district.
So am I following this correctly, that the way that they're supposedly getting around the Hancock Amendment is that they're saying, like, yeah, we're giving it to the vote of the people, but if the people don't pass it, then we're taking over.
Yes. Yes. But okay. I wonder if somebody can file that lawsuit again because it's so bad.
Yeah.
And so everyone complains about the school district tax rates and everything. Well, you couldn't even go to $1 if you wanted to.
Interesting.
Right. So, and I didn't even heard of the Outstanding Schools Act until I think I ran for school board. It's all new to me. I'm not going to pretend that I've known about this forever. What really I didn't understand was that other states are not doing this accreditation model.
Right.
And once you start to realize that Missouri is probably one of the, if not the biggest, one of the has the most overreach and control on local school districts compared to the rest of the United States.
Wow.
Like even more than California. California probably has like the weird sweeping things, but the accreditation is held over every school's head.
Yeah.
And then there's this added thing in the act as well, and it's called the Missouri School Improvement Program, MSIP. And it was always kind of around, but it got put on steroids when this act was passed. And remember, an act isn't just a legislative act. this is not in our Constitution. This could be changed. Anything in this act at any time could be changed with a stroke of the pen, or a line here, a line there.
Yeah.
And so the way the state accreditation works is they have the MSIP that's part of it. And what they're doing is passing, a law here, a law there, and putting it under what's called MSIP. And then the school boards, every year, we had to sign a document that says that we are going to follow all of the laws in MSIP. And sometimes I feel like they're even guidelines. They're not even mandates, but they present themselves as mandates. And so everybody's kind of indoctrinated to think like you have to do all this stuff. And so you really have to go in and say, no, you don't have to do that. And superintendents, administrators, they first of all are afraid to lose their jobs. When you have the state that gives them their certification, you have the fox watching the hen house, many of them, 5 different angles. So the state does accreditation. The state certifies teachers and administrator. The state approves which groups can give school board training. So don't even get me started on all that. Because
the state knows what's best for every single district.
Well, so MSBA's head lobbyist is the son of the State Board of Ed president. MSBA. So MSBA and I have a love-hate, or probably more hate relationship. But I was a delegate. I went up there. I would listen and watch what they were doing, and it was really frustrating to see what happens in you have to go to these conferences. You don't want to. It's wasted. Personally, I felt like it was a waste of time. I got to see some other school board members. That was great across the state. But that's these conferences for all different elected officials. Commissioners have, the groups and conferences. Right. The county clerks, and so we have a lot of non-elected groups indoctrinating and telling elected officials what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
A lot of it. And I remember when I went to my MSBA school board training, I had this binder. And one thing that really stood out to me says the school board delegates all authority to the superintendent. They're training them. So you have an NGO, MSBA, that is approved by the State Board of Ed to give training. There's only 2 of them, MSBA and Missouri Area Rural Groups. So they're a little more benign. I would recommend using them. MOMARE, I think is how you say it. But what they're doing is you have an NGO telling elected officials, put you in a room.
Sorry, an NGO is a non-government official, correct?
Right, organization,
non-government organization.
We have a lot of those.
Yep. This means that they are unelected.
Right.
But
they're the experts.
Right. But they're the experts, and so everyone is supposed to listen to them, which is what Gail was saying.
With no discernment. Right.
Yeah, we have a lot of elected officials who are having to go get training from unelected organizations and officials.
And really, I think the only training that most places need to understand is they need to have legal training. I think it's important to understand the laws that or what your legal authority is as an elected person. What are your statutes? The Sunshine Law. Those things are very appropriate, I think, for legal. You just need an attorney to give you a couple of days of training. That's what you really need. You don't need all this other stuff. I remember sitting in that same training, and one of the speakers that spoke for a while, he was a retired superintendent, and he goes, school board members should not endorse other people as candidates. And I just looked around the room. I'm like, excuse me? Like that would be like I couldn't endorse somebody running for whatever. And that's pretty common practice. And I think what was happening is some people were doing in areas that maybe it wasn't as popular. And I just looked at him. I said, I'm an elected official. I didn't say anything to him at the time. I was, I was just in shock that somebody would have the gall to sit there for training to, they're training us how to act and how to go along, get along. And I would say most of the people in that room that I was with, we were kind of we were up to the last month that you get the training. So it was all the rural people from all over the state that like just didn't have time to go sit in Columbia and take the training.
Right.
In fact, most of them were turkey farmers. And so we had a good kind of chuckle of like, okay. But going back to the 1993 Outstanding Schools Act is that there's so much, it's a ridiculous amount of overreach in laws. It's a lot for the school districts to even follow. And then every year, Republicans are passing the most ridiculous laws. I've had to work really hard to even get the state board. So they pretty much open up the state board of ed to just do whatever they want.
Yeah. And
through the promulgation of rules. So what will happen is, the legislative will pass a law, section of law, and say something really kind of vague and benign. And then, but at the bottom it says, and the department, so whatever department they identify, shall promulgate the rules.
And generally those departments are unelected. No? Sometimes?
No, because for educations, it's a state board of ed.
Is a state board of ed elected?
Well, no, you're right. They're appointed. Thank you.
Okay.
So it depends.
Okay.
So the Treasury might be a department, and that's where most scholars promulgated the rule.
Yes.
For homeschoolers that still on the books and nobody fixed.
Yep.
Their big school choice thing last year, they still didn't fix the most egregious evasive law on the book. They didn't even touch it.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a law, it was a rule.
Yeah.
They didn't tell the Treasury he couldn't do that.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that next week.
Okay. Good.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, that's more current.
Yeah.
Stuff.
So, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes when people say equitable, I don't fully understand what that means. So when you're saying, back when there was one school district that was spending, $500 on a student, and then another school district that was spending $300 on a student.
Right.
So instead of the schools just being allowed to do that because that's what their districts need, the state looked at it and said, that's not equitable, meaning like it needs to be the same for everybody for whatever reason.
And so
is that right?
Right. And then the state would make up the difference.
The state funding would make up the difference? So then does that increase state taxes?
Nope. They would do it within the 25%.
Okay.
Unless they decided to spend more. But it has to be within, for sure, the 25%. That's in the Constitution.
Okay.
So that, I don't remember when that passed, but that's been around for a while. I think that's in the 40s. There's different parts of history where like there was a lot of law put into place. 1913 being a big year.
Oh goodness, yes.
The 1940s, big year. They were always using times of war and fear, and that's when you'll see those patterns.
Right.
A lot.
Right.
And even in recent times with COVID and all the fear, we got all kinds of mass spending. Then they use it to spend, a ton of money. So at the school, I was part of a board that said no to $8 million of American Rescue Plan money. Mm-hmm. And I think we might have been the only one in the United States that did that.
And that was during COVID, correct?
That was it was summer 2021.
Okay.
So American Rescue Plan, and I said this when I was sitting on the board when we were discussing it, the economists were saying this is going to cause inflation. Mm-hmm. This is printing money. So the American Rescue Plan printed money. It did not take money from an existing budget.
Okay.
And we have a ton of it going everywhere. So you'll see so what happened then is a ton of money, a ton of new jobs that are really government jobs. There's different things all in the American Rescue Plan, but it was definitely a lot of it geared towards, quote, COVID recovery. But in education, they wanted 20% of that to be allocated to social emotional learning.
Uh-huh.
So 20% had to be done with like some type of, mental health, like the kids that, they're out of school. The narrative is they're out of school and, getting them back and they're emotionally, we got to have
because they've been with their parents who have no idea how to raise their kids.
I was like, Camden was only out of school for the last 6 weeks, and then it came back and operated somewhat normal for that next year. They still did the masking and everything that I was against. I was not on the board during that time. When I got on the board, we got rid of.
That's right.
The first night I was elected, 4 people voted along with me, Callie, Troy, and Brian, to remove all the COVID measures. And I mean, we ripped the Band-Aid off. And I would say most of the teachers and admin were supportive of it. It was just there was so much going on that they had to undo that it was a bit chaotic. And I just told the teachers and everyone after that when they were like, well, we have to get the ice machines back on, and we have to get the water fountains turned back on. Man. We have to get the rugs, the carpet squares back out. And so I didn't realize all the things they weren't doing.
Right.
And I was like, but I don't support that either. So let's get that.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is ridiculous. And so I would say that, I'll give it to the staff, even if they, some of them don't care for me to this day. So they did a good job of undoing that and then we undid, I can't remember how much contract tracing they really were due versus like this student sat by this student.
Okay.
So this student got COVID, so they need to stay at home.
Okay.
So there was a lot of secondary quarantine still going on in April 2021.
Goodness.
But we were one of the first ones to say officially, we're not doing that anymore.
Right.
I think there were some schools that kind of like, not doing it.
Right.
But we made a statement about it.
Yeah.
And we're done with it.
Well, and I mean, from what I have heard from, and, maybe it's just the groups that I'm in, I don't know. But, I mean, I would say that in general, the consensus from parents and students at Camdenton were grateful for those things because it just wasn't necessary, but it was being forced on all the schools and the population in general, and it just wasn't necessary, and it was causing so much harm. Mm-hmm. So
they forced a mental health issue by secondary quarantine, and then they got the fix for you.
Right.
They got this software. They got this new agenda that they're going to sell you under the American Rescue Plan because those groups are lobbying at the federal level to mandate that you use those types of software.
Right.
Like that is a dog and pony show. It's going back to what the schools. We can get more into the history and the state accreditation stuff because that's where we're at now because we're kind of past the COVID. But I'm going to say one thing about the COVID thing is that you had the experts at the CDC, the federal level, right, that were telling the Missouri Health Department what to do, and the state level was telling the local health departments what to do. And at that time, I was starting to kind of nerd out on law and ordinances, and what they were using was the federal, and I wasn't like the only one, like lawyers. I was obviously getting information from research. What they were, the CDC did its own order, and it said based on this code, whatever that was passed years ago, under this code or this rule, you have to do X, Y, and Z. Well, if you go to the actual code that they're referencing, it was for kind of like import and exports of plants and pesticides and stuff. It had nothing to do with masking and quarantining people. And so what's funny enough is I don't know if you ever heard, when I got on the school board, it was April 2021. We're getting ready to go then in August into the new school year. And I get an email from the old health department director, from my superintendent. First of all, the old Camden County Health Department director now is being told at the state level. So I don't want to, totally they're in a weird spot. They're in a spot like they're telling them if they don't do this, people are going to die. Like it was scary. It's very scary. So I don't want to falter them for that. I think they were very stressed out. So what happened is they sent the email, though, to all the superintendents and not the school board. I always thought that was kind of funny. And I will say that the superintendent at the time, Dr. Hadfeld, I'll give it to him, even though we probably weren't totally aligned all the time. He was a very polite man. But he sent this email from the health department and said FYI, because he just knew that we weren't we weren't doing these things. And it had all these, like a document on what they were advising the school to do. But then at the very bottom, and it said, and by the way, per federal CDC order, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And that really tripped my trigger. Like, I was not happy. Mm-hmm. And so I emailed back as politely as I could, copied all the superintendents, copied everyone. Because I wanted Richland, I wanted Stoutland, every Cayman County, associated group. I wanted them to see what I had to say about that. And maybe help, stand in the gap for them, or at least give them something that they can stand on if they want to.
Right.
And so I responded, thank you for your, I don't have it, verbatim right now, but, thank you for your advice. And by the way, the CDC has no authority over what we do at our school. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people really understand that. Like, they really don't. Like, they might be a governmental agency, quasi.
Yeah.
But they only have authority, and that's why the recent Chevron case is so amazing. So that is we'll have to write that one down, folks. Okay. The Chevron case just happened, and you'll have to think of, some fishermen in, I don't know, in the Carolinas, I think. And Nathan Rennie actually is the one that kind of told me to watch that one, and I kind of forgot about it. And then, so what the Chevron case at the Supreme Court says, it says that the federal agencies are operating outside of their scope of their authority, because they were telling these, I think the local fishery or something happened where they were telling the fishermen they had to do something and they had to pay a fee, and they sued. I think the lawyer went pro bono. So shout out to all the attorneys who went pro bono. It's not easy for the little guy. And they won. And so that actually, that Chevron case, I think, goes back, I don't know. I don't think it's Enron. I can't remember. But it was called the Chevron deferment or whatever. Anyways, it's been repealed. It's been reversed.
Okay.
The decision was reversed.
Okay.
And that put a kind of a slap the hand on all the regulatory agencies. So you're talking EPA, right, CDC, all these agencies, because of this one thing. Now they can't just go out and make their own orders, like what the CDC was doing during COVID, mm-hmm, and being passed all the way down to our school as a requirement. They were operating outside their scope.
Yes.
Is what this happened. So one more example of this legislation, how it impacted things, is that there was, during COVID, the rental moratorium that the CDC put out, ironically, meaning that the landlords could not kick out their tenants if they weren't paying.
Right.
Do you remember Cori Bush and the squad on the courthouse steps, camping out? That was the rental moratorium.
I remember that now.
And what happened is they were using the same CDC. They were using the same ordinance that the CDC made up, mm-hmm, citing the Public Health Order Act of, I don't know, 1940 something. I'll have to find that one. So the Supreme Court, it got to the Supreme Court maybe a month before the rental moratorium was expiring, and the Supreme Court said, we're just going to let it expire, but if you do this again, it's unconstitutional. And so Joe Biden goes up. He's won the presidency at that time. It's 21. This is the summer of 21. Yeah. Or actually, after I told the health department to pound sand, I think I cited, me and the attorneys were going back and forth.
Right.
And I was like, it's just like their rental moratorium, blah, 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 and it's getting ready to hit the Supreme Court. And the school attorneys agreed with me and said, yeah, you're
nice,
right. We'll have to see what that does. And so a couple months later, after I told the health department, no, that CDC order has no authority, sure enough, the Supreme Court says that they should never have made that ordinance. They don't have that authority. And then Joe Biden goes up and says, we're going to go ahead and institute another one, and even if it doesn't hold up to constitutional muster. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't.
Okay, so he's pretty much telling the Supreme Court, you told us not to do another one, to extend it, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I don't think they were very happy about that. And so they immediately said no and ruled it unconstitutional and gave it the final, it's unconstitutional.
Right.
And that was when the Cori Bush and them were sleeping on the steps protesting that. And so that really goes back to, it's not that people want people on the streets. It's not that people, whatever, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's you're enacting laws and rules that are not constitutional.
Yes.
And we have to go back to things that are constitutionally done, right?
Right.
So there's so many great stories during the COVID years. That was you stand up and fight, and you take on a lot of risk, and you hope you come out smelling like roses. And luckily, the school, when we did take a lot of that away in April 2021, the COVID rates were going down at the school and the community. And, you know, back then, the students are always with each other. So it's like they already kind of had their own, like, quarantining because they're just with each other all the time. So it just didn't make sense. Okay, so back to 1990 outstanding school debt, because we are still dealing with that today. So we got through most of the COVID stuff. We're kind of past that for most places. And we're still, so you know, I'm on the school board, and I'm just looking at all these laws and, you know, why are we tied to this, and why do we have to do this? Oh, they say we you know, fought Common Core. We're not teaching Common Core. Well, actually, they passed a law that says that they can't do the Common Core, quote, initiative, but that doesn't mean they can't pull Common Core ideas into curriculum. And so all the books are made nationally and for Common Core. So we're teaching Common Core. Now, there might be some argument, depending on who you talk to. I'm not a curriculum expert, so I don't want to pretend that that's my thing, that some things in Common Core might be okay, blah, blah, blah. Well, one thing that is going on is the federal law, ESSA, really is Common Core. Really, I mean, so we're practically forced to use it without it saying Common Core, meaning there's a couple things in there that are mandated. One is college and career readiness. That is where all the junk is put. All the junk. To make you college and career ready, that's where all the junk is.
Okay, so I want to dig into that just a little bit because, you know, I always try and look at things from both perspectives because I think that just, it helps, you know, I think it's important. And so when you say, let's implement this in schools, in elementary, high school, middle school, whatever, so that way kids are more prepared for college and careers.
Right.
That sounds great. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, you know, it's like, yeah, why wouldn't we want? Because as a parent, I want to raise my child to be a responsible, functioning adult in the world. I don't want to raise a child that's going to stay a child.
Right.
And so, you know, that's my mentality. So then thinking about, oh, yeah, let's prepare kids in middle school, high school for the future. So what is it about that is bad or that could cause issue?
So they're preparing for a future that they want them to participate in.
That the educators want them.
Whoever, you know, so when it's college and career readiness, it's for certain careers that they drive the path towards. You know, nobody's doing the old school career stuff. It's all.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So so first of all, I guess you have to ask yourself, what is the role of education? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's like grammar, logic, you know, math, you know, those things. And not maybe in high school, you know, in our LCTC and our whatever. I mean, those kids are almost ready to be adults. I think those years probably fine to start implementing that if it's truly a career, you know, trajectory, like not a bunch of other junk in there. Right. Okay, let's just assume that it's all straight and well-intended information and curriculum. But K through 8, we're pushing kids to college and career readiness when the grammar and phonics and those things aren't to the level that we probably grew up in. We are not. Our children are not in the education system that I grew up in. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not.
Right.
No way.
Right.
I would say that there were other schools that were testing different types of theories, open classrooms, like Parkway in St. Louis. I think it was way more progressive with those agendas, and I think it really messed with people. Like whole language, whole child. We got dealing with that too. The WISC model, that's the CDC model. That's coming back. That's more current stuff.
What does whole language mean?
So whole language was more of a sight, and it was less it wasn't a phonics based
Okay.
ELA, English language. It was more of, pictures and being recognized. Like, okay, so if you see a broom, that's a broom, instead of just teaching
how to, right.
phonics.
It's almost, honestly, like when I hear that, it sounds like, let's see how we can dumb kids down.
I think there was always just somebody that was a new expert that had done some survey of 20 people, and now they're
20 people.
Don't get me started. Yeah. Every time I look at any survey, any sample size, I go into the journals and I look at what so it's like, oh, we weren't able to do any random controlled testing or whatever. We weren't able. Our sample size was. This is my favorite one recently with the Missouri Chamber. The U.S. Chamber for child care tax credits. We surveyed 312 people, parents in Missouri, and there is a child care crisis. And I am just thinking, how? Okay, so there are child care centers closing because they're overregulated by the state. Okay, so looks like we're running up on time, maybe. So okay. So I want to get back to the state of credit because the current stuff. Yes. There's so much current stuff that's a whole nother day. So. In 1993, we're still living under the Outstanding Schools Act with MSIP, and we're in our 6th version of MSIP. And what they continue to do at the state board is just keep changing the game, and schools cannot adjust. I mean, it's a disaster. So if I leave the people with anything today,
yes,
because we talked about a lot, super confusing, is that currently the State Board of Education is doing accreditation for the local schools, and also mandating on what that accreditation looks like. And so it's the fox watching the hen house. And what Missourians don't know is that other states, many of the East Coast, they might be, to some of us leftists, but they are high performing schools. They all do third party accreditation. So the goal is to get the legislator to get the boot off the neck of the local schools from DESE. I know a lot of people are upset with their local schools, but I think if you start to see that they're really indoctrinated and mandated to do so much junk that they can't even focus on actually teaching.
That's true. Yeah, that is very true. Keep going.
Okay, and then also just to truly let it be up to the local people. I lost my recent school board race. I probably didn't campaign hard enough. I lost by 14 votes, but that's okay. And we still have a very strong board, and I'm very happy with the changes that we made there. But if I saw that there was a need, I'd run again. Absolutely. Right. And so, but that's the deal is we want all forms of industry and different laws and different things to be as local as possible, because the local people, as we know in Camden County, and how, all the great things we've done here, we've been able to do it because we had that local authority.
Right.
And when we're stuck with the state and anything beyond that, that's when it gets really frustrating. So you want to make it as much, the left has really used the word local control in different ways. But I do think we need more local control of education.
Absolutely.
It needs to be deregulated, and we can not be tricked into the narrative of school choice that isn't true educational freedom. Because what happens is they're destroying the public education, using it and say, hey, look, but the same people pushing the narrative for school choice are the ones that are passing laws that are forcing very progressive sexual education. Mm-hmm. Holly Rader, Bishop Davison, SEL pilots. It's been all the Republicans.
Right.
So I'm not buying that anymore. I'm like, let's give the last 30 years since the Outstanding Schools Act in 1993, education has gone way downhill.
Yes.
I graduated in 99. I think up to then I probably had it okay. Mm-hmm. Obviously it could have been better, but public education for sure. And it's definitely gotten worse since this act. That's overregulated, overmandated, and it forces the schools to constantly be listening to the quote experts elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot that we can dig into here, and like I had said several times, we want to make sure not to overwhelm, because this is really important for people to understand why we are where we are. And so if you're good with it, let's pick up next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to have another guest with us next week as well to kind of talk about more of like the homeschool side of it as well. And
great.
And then we can, I just really want people to have all the information, and then they can make their own educated decision based on that. Because right now there's such a false narrative about education. And really that's, if kids are not being taught well and taught how to think for themselves, they're just going to keep getting indoctrinated. And, who knows what's going to happen to our country from there. I mean,
and even if your kids go to public school, you need to be having these conversations with your kids at home.
Absolutely.
Like, my kids know what to look for, and to know to maybe not question the teacher and make a big stink, but say, hey, Mom, this, and I'll talk to them about it.
Right.
Because they're going to see these things out in the real world too. So there is a sense of, okay, well, they're going to see it. Let's, as a parent, guide them through this process. And I fully support homeschooling. I, would do it in a heartbeat. I go back and I wrestle with it all the time. So I really...
Yeah, you're homeschooling hockey.
Yeah. I mean, we're pretty close. Pretty close. I don't... There's a sense of public education where it's there. It's not going anywhere. There's really no sense of... It's not productive just to beat it up.
Right.
Like it's not productive. Absolutely. We need to make it the best we possibly can, and then protect educational freedom.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Well, I've been listening in, and Gail, I honestly don't want you to answer this, just because I think it may not be necessarily helpful in the future, depending on what your plans are. But in my opinion, it's kind of like I said with the TCLA. If you recall, maybe it's just a little bit too far gone, and we'd be better off trying to burn it all down. Because I think it's way too entrenched. I think all the stuff that you're fighting, I don't see how it's ever, it's next to impossible to win. I mean, look at Bill Eigel. He went all over the state, met with everybody in every little town, and he still got beat by an establishment shill. I just do not think the grassroots has it to win this fight. I don't think you'll ever get the Senate or anybody else to vote for anything. So I do
have an answer that, just like a thought. I do have a thought on some of that. I always thought that if a local community didn't, like, say that's more rural and doesn't, need a school, that the local community can decide not to have a public school, and then they can vote for that, and then you can almost have market competition there, where you see how well that community does just by doing their own whatever with the church or private or homeschool. And if that market, people start investing there, they want to live there.
Yep.
I feel like that's just a theory of mine, that why are we forced to have a local school? Why can't that be up to the community?
Yep. That's how it's
I tell you what, south of Lebanon, there may be an example of that. It's a town called Evergreen. It's pretty much all owned by the Standard Oil guy, Plaster. He owns like 22,000 continuous acres. And he's got his own little town hall. It's all him. Oh. It's his town.
There you go.
I mean, if there were a way to do it and get out of a school district, I would sign up, because I have no use for them. And I mean, the people who are retired, who are still paying for these school districts, I'm sure would love to live in a place like that. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if the fight.
Yeah.
What's that?
I don't know. Yeah, and I'm more in the, like, is it the fight, or is it just educating people on what's going on first? Because, not as many people are as informed as you, I, or Nadine, and so you also don't want to necessarily feed into the Marxist fascists by burning it down and forcing everybody into government-controlled private homeschool, because that's where they'll lead you next. And so
I don't think that I don't think you're going to wake people up, Gail. Honestly, the average voter is a mouth breather.
It's for me. It's for the next. Whatever. I get it. I totally get it. Thank you.
Yeah.
The average voter in Missouri voted for Mike Kehoe and thinks that he's conservative.
Yeah, well, that's
Okay.
Farm Bureau. That's all the I mean, you should see the spread for Farm Bureau. Most of the real farmers I know are not part of Farm Bureau. So they've
Most
just
of
captured.
the real farmers I know are subsidized heavily,
Right.
and they're basically socialists, whether they want to admit it or not.
Well, because they've been
but
forced. They were
that's another
forced to
topic.
not farm in the Great Depression. I mean, it's there's a lot of systems that have just been created.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a mess for
Either
sure.
way, to me, the whole education system can just burn to the ground for all I care. If I could find a place in this entire country that didn't have a school district and had no school tax, yeah, I'd be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I feel
And
like that
think
should be a free market.
As a free country, it's sad that we don't have that option.
So right now in the state of Missouri, under the Outstanding Schools Act, everybody has to pay a public school tax, whether they have one or not. So if a school closes down, they still got to pay the tax, and those kids go to another. They get bused to another district.
Sure, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If there was a place where that did not exist,
Yeah.
that would be the utopia.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
and I think, I'm an optimist, and so I just like to hold on to the hope that we have in Jesus Christ that this is not our home, but while we're here, we're going to keep working, and we're going to trust the results to God and just keep doing what we're supposed to do and not throw in the towel. Cause
Honestly.
I came into this fight later, right? A lot of you guys have been in this fight for a lot longer than I have. And so I get it. I mean, after some SB 727 stuff, the beginning of this year, I almost felt defeated and wanted to give up. So I can imagine what it's been like for those of you who have been doing this for years already. But what I'm seeing is there are so many people like me who are waking up, and it's the younger generations that are actually stepping in to try and make a difference because they're seeing the way that the country's going. There's a lot of the older generation that is kind of throwing in the towel because they're a little bit like, well, we're going to be gone soon anyway, so why do we care? Well, but these younger generations, they do still care, and they're starting to take in more good information, but if we stop giving the good information, everything will burn because that's the direction the country is going.
Yeah, Nathan, what does burn it down look like you without sound? Like, I'm sure people think that you're going to go, you're not, that's metaphorically, like, what does that look like to you?
Right? It's metaphorical, right?
Yeah. What does that look like to you?
It's definitely metaphorical. And I mean, one way would be, if people in mass, I'm not talking about, the problem is, and a lot of activists get this problem and they don't realize where they're at. A lot of times we're in a bubble. I hear you say, so many people, but is it enough to affect a change? The thing that I know about politics is how to read the room. I do. I can look at a situation and I play it out in my head. Maybe I played chess massively when I was a kid. I don't know if that is any correlation whatsoever, but strategy is very important, and a lot of times people lose sight of that. They think that they can just throw crap at the wall and hope that it sticks. Personally, the more I reflect, I think maybe we missed an opportunity during COVID. Imagine this. Imagine if we had went to digital schooling. Now, I know a lot of people don't like that idea. A lot of people do not like that idea whatsoever. But if we would have went to a home-based digital education model and most kids had not went back to school, like let's say only 100 kids, parents said, no, you're going back to school, and they didn't have enough to actually open the school back.
They would
they're
just
going to have
close
to
down
lay
the
off
school,
the teachers.
still
Yes,
charge
they're
you
gonna-
taxes, and then regulate the virtual homeschool. That's what
Yep.
they'll do. And that's what they're trying to
But
do
that's
now.
what they're
And
trying
that-
to do anyway.
And
Yeah.
that may be, but here's the thing. If they don't have, they cannot. Hancock Amendment, you can't have a windfall. You cannot have a massive gut surplus of budget. They may charge you taxes, but they're not going to be able to justify the taxes it takes to pay 600 employees when it's a digital program. They're
Did
not
you
going
hear
to be
the
able
beginning
to
of
justify
my thing
that.
where they mandated?
All the facilities, all the things, everything that they have in those facilities, those are part of the cost. If we didn't have the facilities, if we had a digital thing, the cost savings would be there. There's no denying that. And here's the other thing. That school in Camden County takes more money than all other services combined. Everything.
Do you think that the computers are going to be cheap? I mean, what? Sure.
Yeah, compared to paying, they don't require a salary, Gail. They require a one-time purchase and then an update and then a grade level. Yeah, they are, because I know it, because I do it with homeschool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They would be so much cheaper than paying 600 people's salary, benefits, insurance, retirement, and all the crap that comes with it. You'll never convince me that we get our money out of our teachers or our schools, ever. Nobody will. I think it's a complete joke, especially with the liberal ed and the liberal teachers who their whole purpose of going into school is so they can brainwash little kids into their DEI world. It's happening all over the place.
And I totally know it's happening. I don't deny that one bit.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you calling in, because it's so good to have feedback and to have these kind of conversations. But I am going to have to let you go, because we're I try not to overwhelm people too much, and I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So I really appreciate you calling in. Tune in next week, because we're going to continue the conversation.
Wants real educational freedom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
For sure.
So call in next week, okay? Oh. Hello, you're on the air.
Oh. He's still talking.
Oh, okay. We're gonna close that. I think that was an oops dial. So yeah, I mean, the thing about education is that people care very passionately about it on both sides, right? I mean, that's even the people that we don't agree with, the things that they've implemented, they've been very passionate about it. Mm-hmm. So that's how things get going. And I just think that it is really important to maintain for myself, like, my focus is on Jesus Christ and what he came to give us, and that was freedom. And we are in this country, which we are the government in this country. And yeah, if we throw up our hands and say there's nothing that can be done, then there's nothing, then really, like, it will all burn. I mean, we have to take a stand, and we have to keep fighting. I mean, that's what we have scripture for, is to refresh us and to reinvest in us, and so we don't grow weary and tired and give up. We have to keep moving forward.
We have to push back on the big global movement, and that's hard. Like, and so just the Western values being protected, and that education's maybe 1/4 of that. I mean, it's big. It's big.
Right. And the thing with education is that it's, people think that this kind of quote unquote indoctrination started, in the 40s, 50s, 60s. It's gone back hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the original starting of quote public education back with the Pilgrims, the intention was, it was actually called the Old Deluder Satan Act. So they wanted to make sure that their children would be able to read the Bible. Mm-hmm. That was literally why they started education, public education, was because so many people were in England and they were being ruled by this king who mm-hmm. was telling them everything they should believe, because they weren't reading the Bible for themselves. They couldn't read. And so when they came over here, they thought, we can't allow this to happen. We need people to be able to read and know for themselves what the truth is.
And that's what the founding fathers probably were more focused on. When you have Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson and, Washington, they were starting universities. Mm-hmm. And, it's forever ago, and they probably couldn't see anything. It's hard to see the future. Right. But I will assume that they were... they wanted people to be able to read. They wanted They wanted the civilization to be educated, not indoctrinated.
Right, and they wanted kids to learn how to think for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the level of education back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, early 1800s is just incredible. Mm-hmm. The questions that they're asking these kids in whatever.
Well, I feel like if the founding fathers or that generation just, did a time warp and showed up today, they wouldn't understand us.
Oh my, it would.
We'd be like one of those funny movies.
Yeah.
They're like, who are these people? And I can't understand them, and they're dumb.
I can't, the more that I've studied our history, specifically U.S. history, and just learned a lot about the Pilgrims and the Founding Fathers and those years in between, it makes me sick to think of all that they fought for and gave up, and this is where it's at now.
That's why we need classical ed in public education, and that doesn't mean classical ed is Socrates. It is, it's logic. It's trivium. It's not religion. Some people think classical ed religion, and that is not true. It can be extremely
right.
Non-secular or whatever. So and so we've gotten away from that. I'll tell you, one of the best educations I got was in college, just 2 semesters of political science, because they started us off in classical ed. And we read, The Republic would be the best for that, challenging government. And we haven't been taught to question, to challenge, to be able to read, where to go, and to understand. So we grow up just thinking laws are created, we have to follow them, and that's it.
Yep. We
have no say in them. We can't fix them. And I think that is where our generation, I'm really excited about our generation getting to 60 and 70, and hopefully have laid a really good platform, because I feel like, I'm in my 40s. I feel like we were the pre-tech era. We grew up with technology, but we wasn't like a big part of our youth. So we have a pretty good, understanding of balance kind of for it, right? Ethical issues.
We at least know what it's like to live
not
without
have
it.
Yeah. Like it exists. And technology is not going away. So it's obviously being ethical with anything. And I love modern medicine, but also being ethical. And it was really the pseudoscience era. There's all this research of finding, coronaviruses back in, I don't know, like decades ago. And they were like, there's hundreds of them.
Right. We
can't vaccinate against them. They morph, they change. It's never going to happen. And just anybody I know that's ever had the flu, if they had the flu shot, they probably still got the flu. Right. I mean, it's just, we're getting into like nonsensical pseudoscience. Right. And that is a problem. And that is coming through the institutions. So the long march through the institutions, they realized to get to the West, the socialists, the Fabians, whatever group, but most of them are the same, that they knew they had to get to the institutions, and they had to teach the teachers how to teach the children. And that's Paulo Freire is a big one in that one, and he comes out of the Marxist communists. But so what we're dealing with, and there was just a post on Facebook last night about DEI. The school is used a third-party substitute agency, and so there's just different things like that, and there's a lot of agendas, a lot of discussion to have. But at the end of the day, we don't need any of this junk. We just really need our kids to be able to read and write. Yeah. Math even as a side. Really grammar, phonics first.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, let's literally get back to the basics and then see what happens from there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to do these next couple of weeks of education, and then I'm going to spend several weeks talking about Amendment 3, which is the abortion amendment that's going to be on the November ballot. The reason why I wanted to kind of lead with education is because we can make all these laws. We can hopefully keep them from getting in our Constitution. But at the end of the day, it's truly the hearts that have to change. And that's, in my opinion, it's not really going to happen as long as there is this terrible indoctrination happening with the majority of kids in education that's telling them that life is not valuable and that they make their own truth and that whatever they want is what's best. Mm-hmm. And this has to stop. We have to learn that there is an absolute truth and that is what's best for all of us, even if it doesn't seem like it at the time. And I mean, when I worked at the Pregnancy Help Center, there were just amazing stories of women who had unplanned pregnancies, who had difficult pregnancies, but chose life, and they have beautiful stories from that. And it wasn't easy, but through that trial, they've grown so much, and they now have this beautiful child and beautiful sibling, grandchild, whatever. It affects so many people when you bring life into the world. The same is true for the opposite. When you take life, it affects so many people as well. And, there's been millions and millions of children killed in our country. That if you don't think that's been affecting our country,
right,
then you're mistaken.
Right.
Because
they complain about, population decline.
Right.
And I always say that's a very difficult topic to discuss.
It is.
And I'm not the expert on, well, no, I guess no one's really the expert, right? But I always think that no matter what has happened to the woman, if it happened to me, no matter what has happened, you're never going to change what happened, right? Whether it was the rape or something unplanned or whatever, you're never going to change that act. So killing the unborn isn't going to undo that. So I just am like, that isn't really a good answer to that. Oh, what about this, and that? I can't believe them carrying it. Well, is them killing it really going to help them get over rape? I mean, they're never going to get over that. That's a life, whether pregnant or not. So they're conflating the two. Right.
And those are things that we're going to talk about too, because those are just, I don't necessarily just want to say lies, but because I know that in those situations, it's very, very difficult to see beyond what you're in. But there are so many wonderful testimonies of women who are, kids, like young girls.
We need to start prosecuting the criminals.
Right.
It's how easy is it for them just to wipe away their crime, too. We need to be tougher on crime.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. Let's
be preventative. Let's scare some people to maybe not create crimes.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I just think it's vital that we invest in education as much as we can. I think it's great. There are a lot of states that are bringing back the 10 Commandments. The founding fathers' thought process was, even if you do not believe in the Bible, there's really no parent who wouldn't want their child to live by the 10 Commandments. Don't murder, don't steal, don't cheat on your spouse, all these things.
Benign. Yeah,
don't lie.
Broad.
So it's like, if you raise up a generation with this as your foundation, even if they don't want to believe in the rest of the Bible or in God, they still have this really strong moral foundation. And that, murder right there is like, if we're teaching kids from the time they enter into school, and, hopefully parents before that, but not to murder, and this life that's growing inside of a woman is a human, which has been proven, then that's murder. And so I just think, let's bring it back to education and let's try and work on teaching the value of life, and hopefully that will start working in the hearts of people.
They passed a law last 2 years ago that they could teach the New Testament in public schools. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't, whatever. And then somebody said to me, like, no, we don't want the public school teaching our children about that, because they might not teach it the way that we would teach it. And I thought about that more. I'm like, oh, you're right. Like, probably shouldn't have that. So you don't think of it always that way. It's always good when you hear other points of view, because if you're gonna have, it's gonna have to be super factual, and it's gonna have to have the right teacher. Well, when you're putting in it, public education has got way too much going on, that maybe that isn't the best thing. Yeah. But the school has to adopt to do it.
Right.
So it can be more localized.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you have to be very vigilant. You can't just send your kid off somewhere or sit them in front of a TV or computer and not have any involvement whatsoever, because there are people who want to destroy your child.
Well, and a lot of the churches and a lot of the groups are joining in with them into spirituality and education movement, where it's all the religions together, but really going into monotheism.
Oh.
So like I was just doing a deep dive on this one academy where it's the Baptists, the Hindus, and they're all, it sounds great, like you're being diverse and inclusive, right? But what they're really doing is moving into one spirituality. And so
wow, that's scary.
That's what SEL is.
Yeah, that's really scary. And I'm not even going to get into all of that because
Yeah,
we're running out of time.
Well, I'd love to come maybe later as things kind of catch up. But people need to understand the spiritual and education movement. There's a conference happening in October. This is like
that would be
Teachers
good to talk about.
College, and by Fetzer, Rockefeller, and it's the spirituality movement, and that is not legal in public, in the public education.
Yeah,
and we are just letting it slide through. You can't have Christianity, but you can have this monotheistic spirituality, New Age, Gia stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that's scary. Yeah, we will be back next week for sure. And then we might just take even more weeks after that because I think I'm very passionate about homeschooling. I've become even more interested in public education because I realize the impact it has on our country. And so I'm becoming more invested in public education, even though my child is homeschooled. I just think it's important for people, whether you have a kid in school or not, you really should have a vested interest in the public education system because those will, one, be your kids' peers if you have kids, or two, they're going to be the future leaders of our country.
Your employees.
Right. They'll be, they're going to be
part of
part of your life. Yeah. Right. So...
Well, yeah, let's look at how we're affected by, the students that are protesting at colleges. I mean, we got to deal with these kids. Where do they come from? Who's educating them?
Right.
I mean, most of them are backed by these, Popular Front organization. But anyways, like if we don't educate our kids to look for that and to recognize it, they'll get swept up in the movement. It's exciting. They're young. It's, let's go protest.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, for sure. Okay. Well, everybody, I am going to close out. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave with, Gail?
Well, I would just say thank you for everyone for listening. And, I'm still learning. I'm still researching. I will never call myself an expert. But it's all factual, and it's just sharing information. And I learn just from talking to other people. They correct me or say, oh, well, this is really this. And so I think the conversation is important. I'm really proud of our local community and all the gains that it's made. And I'm thankful that JR started Damn Radio.
I know. Same. Yes. And I want to apologize to everybody again for the hiccups that we had today. I hope that you stuck it out and that you'll come back. And as always, if you have something that you want to call in and talk about, or if you want to correct us on something, we always, like Gail was saying, we are learning alongside with everybody else. And we want to make sure that we're passing on the truth, that it's not just what we think. So always feel free to please call in and talk about that. And until next time, I'm going to sign off here at Damn Radio, Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. And until next time, let's not act like children.